early 1970s would see the popularity of the American touring coupe explode, commonly being referred to as personal coupes, in spite of having no sports car connection at all, and showing up in both the large and intermediate segments of the market. The Dodge Charger had been around the longest of the mid-size cars, going into its third restyle in 1971. Typically priced from $2,700 to $3,800, sales were around $80,000 for the year. It was 205 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,400 to 4,000 pounds. Base engine was the 3.7-liter 225/6 with the 5.2-liter 318, 6.3-liter 383, 7-liter 426, and 7.2-liter 440 V8s, with 145 to 425 horsepower gross, or 110 to 350 net. An RT Hemi could do a mid-14-second quarter mile and more than 140 miles an hour. But it was the Chevrolet Monte Carlo that really popularized the segment, introduced in 1970, with first-year sales over $130,000. Starting at $3,100, it was 206 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase and 3,600 to 3,900 pounds. V8s came in 5.7-liter 350, 6.6-liter 400, or 7.4-liter 454, with 250 to 450 gross horsepower, or 160 to 350 net. A 4-speed LS6 Super Sport could do the quarter mile in under 14 seconds and top out over 115 miles an hour. Oldsmobile's Cutlass Supreme of the same year was little more than a Cutlass with a formal roof, still managing $90,000 in sales. Costing $3,200 to $3,300, it was 203 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase and 3,600 to 3,700 pounds. Its 5.7-liter 350 had 250 to 310 gross horsepower, or 165 to 240 net, and the 7.5-liter 455, 320 gross horsepower, or 250 net, for a quarter mile just over 15 seconds, and a top speed of 130. Pontiac's Grand Prix had actually led the way for GM, arriving in 1969, and by 1972 was up to $4,500. But sales remained over $90,000. It was a bit bigger at 214 inches long on a 118-inch wheelbase and 4,000 pounds. Both the 6.6-liter 400 and 7.5-liter 455 had 250 horsepower net, or just over 300 gross. But the bigger engine had 50 more pound-feet of torque, for a mid-15-second quarter mile and a top speed of 115. The Chrysler 300 remained a glorified standard, with the 300H of 1970 attempting to revive the image of the original letter series. But 1971 would be the 300's last year. Priced at $4,600 to $4,700, the only engine was a 7.2-liter 440 with 330 to 370 gross horsepower, or 220 to 305 net horsepower. It was 225 inches long on a 124-inch wheelbase and weighed nearly 4,000 pounds. Less than 15,000 were made, but the TNT 440 could do a mid-15-second quarter mile and more than 130 miles an hour. The Mercury Cougar moved into the segment in 1974, starting at $4,700, more than 90,000 sold for the year. It was 216 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 4,300 to 4,500 pounds, offered with a 5.3-liter 351, 6.6-liter 400, and 7.5-liter 460, with 163 to 255 horsepower net. The performance version being the 351 Cobra Jet, with a top speed over 130 and a quarter mile under 17 seconds. And Ford got a cheaper version of it as the Torino Elite, starting at $4,400. Selling slightly better, it was also 216 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 4,300 to 4,600 pounds, with similar 351, 400, and 460 V8s, with 163 to 220 horsepower net, or 240 to 360 gross. The big engine was good for a mid-17-second quarter mile and a top speed near 125. A steal when compared to the bigger Ford Thunderbird, that started at $5,300 at the time of its last restyle in 1972. Selling nearly 60,000 for the year, it was 215 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, weighing 4,500 to 4,700 pounds. offered with a 6.6-liter 400, 7-liter 429, or 7.5-liter 460, with 172 to 224 horsepower net, or 260 to 365 gross, making it a high 17-second car with a similar 125-mile-an-hour top speed. Buick's Boattail Riviera of 1971 was similarly priced, but sold less than $35,000. It was 217 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase and 4,400 pounds. Its 7.5-liter 455 had 315 to 330 horsepower gross, or 255 to 265 net, and the GS did a high 15-second quarter mile with a top speed near 120. The bottom-breathing front-wheel drive Oldsmobile Toronado of 1971 was a bit pricier at $5,500 and sold less than $30,000 for the year. It was 220 inches long on the same 122-inch wheelbase and 4,700 pounds. Its 455 was rated at 370 horsepower gross, or 275 net, for speeds over 125 and a mid-16-second quarter mile. The 1971 Cadillac Eldorado was also front-wheel drive, but priced from $7,400 to $7,800, also selling under $30,000. 222 inches long on a 122-inch wheelbase, it weighed 4,800 to 4,900 pounds and was powered by a giant 8.2-liter 500 cubic inch V8 with 365 gross horsepower, or 235 net, for a quarter mile under 17 seconds and a top speed over 115. Lincoln's Continental Mark IV arrived for 1972 for a whopping $8,600, but still sold nearly $50,000 for the year. Only 220 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase, it still weighed 5,000 pounds. The only engine was a 7.5-liter 460 with 365 gross horsepower, or 212 net, for a top speed near 120 and a mid-18-second quarter mile, although the optional performance gears took more than half a second off that. Britain's Rolls-Royce Corniche was available in two-door saloon and convertible. Priced around $40,000 in the U.S., it was 204 inches long on a 120-inch wheelbase and 4,800 pounds, powered by a 6.8-liter 412 V8, backed by a GM Turbo-Hydromatic 400 automatic. Horsepower was considered adequate at approximately 200 net for a quarter mile just over 18 seconds, and a top speed near 115. While there are only 287 total of the Bristol 411 made, it was 193 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 3,700 to 3,800 pounds, powered by a Chrysler Big Block, initially a 6.3-liter 383 with 335 gross horsepower, allowing for a 15-second quarter mile and a top speed near 140. Prices would soon exceed $20,000. France had the 504 Coupe from Peugeot. It was 172 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase and 2,700 pounds, but cost around $7,700. In 1970, a 2-liter replaced the 1.8-liter, increasing horsepower from 103 to 109 net, for a quarter mile just over 18 seconds and a top speed around 110, while the Citroën SM was 193 inches long on a 116-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,200 pounds. The Maserati-sourced V6 was initially a 2.8-liter with 177 gross horsepower, or 168 net, for a mid-16-second quarter mile and a top speed near 140. From Germany, the Audi 100S Coupe was 173 inches long on a 101-inch wheelbase and 2,500 pounds. The 1.9-liter inline-four produced 112 horsepower net for a mid-17-second quarter mile and a top speed near 115. Total production exceeded 30,000. For 1971, the BMW E9 became the 3.0 CS, initially with 197 gross horsepower, or 177 net, for a quarter mile around 15 seconds, and a top speed over 130. It was 183 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase and 2,600 pounds. Prices started under $11,000 in the U.S. The two-door Mercedes-Benz 280 SE ran until 1972 and was slightly cheaper. It was 193 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase and 3,300 pounds. The 180 gross horsepower 2.8 liter, or 158 horsepower net, was joined by a limited 233 gross horsepower, or 197 net horsepower, 3.5 liter, for a sub 16-second quarter mile and speeds near 130 miles an hour. Italy had the Lancia 2000 coupe, which was 179 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,700 pounds. The 2-liter Boxer 4 came in 113 and 123 horsepower versions for speeds near 120 and a low 17-second quarter mile, while Fiat's 130 coupe was 191 inches long on a 107-inch wheelbase and 3,400 pounds. It was powered by a 3.2-liter V6 with 162 horsepower net for a mid-16-second quarter mile and a top speed around 120. Australia had the Holden Monaro, which in 1972 came in at 188 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,000 to 3,200 pounds. Engines included a 2.8-liter 170, 173, or 3.3-liter 202 straight 6, or a 4.2-liter 253, 5-liter 308, or 5.7-liter 350 V8. Gross horsepower was 118 to 275 for a low 15-second quarter mile and a top speed over 125. The Chrysler Valiant Charger was 197 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase and weighed 3,200 to 3,400 pounds. The Hemi 6 was offered in 3.5-liter 215, 4-liter 245, 4.3-liter 265, 140 to 280 gross horsepower versions. Or one could opt for a 5.2-liter 318 or 5.6-liter 340 V8 with 230 to 275 gross horsepower, taking just over 15 seconds to do the quarter mile and reaching nearly 130 miles an hour. A variety of vehicles with very different interpretations of what a touring coupe could be, seeing a continuing trend towards luxury going forward. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.